record, I hope to see you do more work with smaller businesses who tell us the Pentagon is just so much trouble to deal with, they don't submit applications. We're missing a lot of innovations, so please attend to that. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator King. Senator Cotton, please.
Mr. Shirley, in the summer of 2020, you said the Army is a pretty Bubba-oriented system. Do you still believe that?
Senator, I think the comment you're referring to was one where I was talking about the importance of leadership and mentorship, and it was a colloquial way of saying that's very, very important.
So do you still believe the Army is a pretty Bubba-oriented system?
I believe that leadership and mentorship in the Army is critical, as it is critical in all of our services.
Do you think that that is a term of praise or a term of criticism?
It's a colloquial phrase to talk about the importance of mentorship and leadership.
Why didn't you say in that New York Times interview in the summer of 2020 that leadership is important in the Army? Why did you call it a Bubba-oriented system?
My recollection is that article was about the importance of having diversity and leadership throughout the armed forces, and I was stressing the importance of leaders making that a priority.
The article, you also implied pretty strongly that criticism of Barack Obama's foreign policy was driven in part by systemic racism. Do you still believe that criticism of Barack Obama's foreign policy is in part racist?
I think there's no question that there were arguments made about President Obama that were rooted in race, no question about it.
Let's consider some of those decisions in which you played a part. You defended strongly the Syrian Red Line fiasco as late as 2016. Do you still believe it was correct for President Obama not to enforce his own red line in Syria?
I believe it was an accomplishment for the United States working with a multinational coalition to get 1,300 tons of chemical weapons out of Syria.
Relying on Vladimir Putin.
It was an accomplishment to get 1,300 tons of chemical weapons out of Syria, Senator.
You obviously didn't get it all out of Syria because Bashar al-Assad later gassed his own people again, didn't he?
He used chemical weapons which were made out of chlorine, industrial chemicals, which was not part of his chemical weapons program.
Do you believe it was correct for Donald Trump to enforce Barack Obama's own red line when he bombed Bashar al-Assad after gassing his own people?
I believe it was important for the United States to engage in the counter-ISIL campaign, which began in the fall of 2014.
So yes or no, did you support Donald Trump's decision to enforce Barack Obama's own red line?
I don't recall that decision.
You don't recall bombing Syria during Donald Trump's presidency?
That specific incident, Senator, I don't recall.
So one thing that Barack Obama did 10 years ago was toss the decision to bomb Syria to Congress, looking for a scapegoat. Obviously, he did not submit the decision to bomb Libya to Congress in 2011. What's the difference? Why did we need congressional approval to bomb Syria in 2013 but not Libya in 2011?
Senator, I can't speak for President Obama on this.
You were on the White House staff at the time in 2011, right?
I was, Senator. I was not part of that decision with President Obama. I can say
what's
there are
your
very different
What's your view of that
circumstances.
question? Do you think we needed congressional approval to bomb Syria?
At the time, I supported I wasn't part of the decision, but I supported President Obama coming to the Congress to get the support of the American people to whether or not we, the United States, were going to intervene in the civil war in Syria.
Do you think the intervention in Libya was wise policy?
Senator, I've written extensively about the lessons learned of our intervention.
That's why I'm asking you here publicly.
At the time, I did believe it was the right policy, yes.
So you don't believe it anymore?
I believe at the time, given the circumstances we faced, it was the right policy.
So Barack Obama has said publicly that Libya is a mess. Privately, I won't say what he said since there are young children in the audience, but it ends with show and it starts with SH. Do you agree with President Obama's retrospective assessment?
I believe
about what kind of mess Libya is?
Thanks, Senator. I believe that the aftermath of the Libyan war, including until today, unfortunately, with this terrible, devastating natural disaster with the dam breaking, killing thousands of Libyans, is an aftermath of that
Let me ask you this. So we withdrew support for a pro-American ruler in Egypt, Hosni Mubarak, and he was toppled. We bombed a de facto pro-American leader in Libya, Muammar Gaddafi, and he was ultimately removed from power. We did not bomb an anti-American dictator in Syria, Bashar al-Assad. Can you explain that series of decisions in the Arab Spring? Why it seems like we always toppled the pro-American rulers there and we sided with the anti-American pro-Iran rulers?
Senator, again, thanks for the question, and I have thought and written extensively about this. I believed at the time, and I believe now, it was a correct decision not to intervene directly in that Syrian civil war, but it was also the correct decision to intervene directly to conduct the counter-ISIL campaign, which the United States began with the support of Congress in the fall of 2014.
Okay, let me turn to your judgment on a contemporary matter. So the Biden administration has been racked by unwarranted anxiety about threats of escalation in Ukraine. So members of this committee in both parties have repeatedly pointed out how there's been one weapon system after another, the latest one being ATACMS, that President Biden has refused to send to Ukraine, only to reverse himself 3 or 6 or 9 months later. A long-standing pattern. In retrospect, do you agree there's any weapon system that the Biden administration should have sent earlier than it finally ended up sending them? Or do you think it's pitched a perfect game on every decision?
Oh, I don't think anyone presumed there's been a perfect game pitched, for sure, but I am satisfied with the amount of assistance that the United States, with the support of the Congress,
I
has
didn't say if
provided
you're satisfied
Ukraine.
or the overall. I'm saying that there's been probably at least a dozen different weapon systems. The latest ATACMS, F-16s, Abrams tanks, cluster munitions, in which the Biden administration has ruled them out, only to turn around and deliver them 3, 6, 9 months later. Is there any specific weapon system that you think the Biden administration made a mistake on, that it ultimately delivered and it should have delivered earlier?
Senator, I'm proud of the administration's record on providing an unprecedented amount of assistance to Ukraine, $44 billion.
My time's up. I would take that as a no, and yet another example of the bad judgment you've displayed for a very long time on these critical foreign policy questions.